we have a pretty good preview of an entire year crammed into just a few weeks, which we can totally use to our benefit in trying to figure out how our property is going to react throughout the year. Let's hack our microclimates. Now, we are currently in the middle of late fall, where the weather really doesn't know what to make of itself. We have days that are absolutely glorious, sunny, warm, beautiful. Then we have these miserable, sloppy, slushy, rainy, weird, cold days. And then we'll have these mild, snowy, beautiful days where the weather in the morning is entirely different from the afternoon. Long and short of it, we get all four seasons wrapped up into just a matter of a few weeks at the end of fall. But instead of hiding away and dreaming about indoor gardening, we can really dive into our garden space right now and utilize this wacky all over time to our benefit for planning for next year's garden space. And in this video, I'm going to show you how so that you can make the perfect garden plan. Now, why should you care what a microclimate is? Well, a microclimate is kind of the backbone to any good garden design. If you've ever noticed a friend, neighbor, family member who can take a plant and put it in a spot and it works, and then you take the same plant and maybe even a cutting of their plant and put it into a spot and it just falls apart on you, this is likely why. You probably don't understand the microclimates of your garden space. And even with experienced gardeners, sometimes we don't read it correctly either. But in this video, I'm going to dive into the ways that you can observe your garden space with all of this fluctuation of weather and really utilize it to your advantage in planning for next year's garden space. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, not only do you want your plants to survive, but perhaps you want to start pushing the boundaries of your garden space a little bit. Maybe you want to extend the growing season, or you want to protect certain things against storms, or you want to be able to do more container gardening and have it over winter. These tips and tricks are going to help you achieve those goals. Now, in this video, I'm going to be covering a number of topics, and perhaps you are a bit more visual and you'd like to pore over some of the diagrams that I pop up on screen. But all of the information that I cover, all of the diagrams, all of the pictures, they're all going to be linked in a blog post below, along with some further information. So make sure to check the description box and you'll be able to find everything you need down there. So scaling back just a little bit on a bigger zone, we have hardiness zones. And I think that's what most people are familiar with when they think of climate and their region. In Toronto, for example, we are a hardiness zone 7. And you may be thinking, no, we are a hardiness zone 6. That's not entirely true. We used to be a hardiness zone 6, but our hardiness zones have been updated in the last number of years, and things are gradually getting warmer. We are able to push the boundaries a little bit more, and certain plants that used to not be able to survive in our region are slowly pushing their way further north. The Canadian hardiness zone is also going to be different from the US hardiness zone. And although they are relatively similar in concept, they do look at different data points. So they don't align perfectly, and they are obviously focused for the country that they are designed for. But the data points that they take into account are going to be things like extreme temperatures from both the hot end to the freezing end, precipitation amounts, and other extremes, first and last frost dates, for example. On the USDA map, we fall into approximately a zone 5 here in the GTA, and then on the Canadian map, we fall into a zone 7. Now, hardiness zones, if you are ever looking at a plant tag, this is what it's going to be referring to. It's going to say hardy down to a zone 3, for example, or it's going to be hardy between zone 2 and zone 9. And this is what it's referring to. It is referring to the hardiness zone of the region. So in theory, it is an area in Canada that that plant can do well in, but that doesn't mean it's going to do well. So let me dive in a little bit more niche down. From here we have climates. Now, if you live in a city such as Toronto, you are probably aware that the weather forecast for Toronto is going to vary comparatively to what you actually experience in your neighborhood. And from neighborhood to neighborhood, even if they're side by side, oftentimes they can be experiencing entirely different weather. And there's a number of reasons for this. One of them is weather patterns. The weather is going to hug along the lake in a different way than it's going to hug along the highway. The towers of the downtown core are going to be altering the wind patterns. tree canopies, so more established neighborhoods are going to have a higher level of tree canopies usually than a newer subdivision will, and all of those are going to be affecting not only your wind patterns but your temperature and a number of other things. And then scaling it down further from there, we have our microclimates, and a microclimate is going to be specific zones on your own piece of property. And even within your own plot of land, it's going to vary from one spot to another. We're talking against a garage wall, to underneath a tree, to a full sun lawn. We're starting to really narrow down the areas into a much smaller space and how the environmental conditions are impacting that specific area. So to determine what our microclimates are in our own properties, we're going to be looking at the following: sun, wind, precipitation, canopies of trees, fixed structures, and the materials of those fixed structures, and also materials elsewhere in your space. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, unless of course Daenerys from Game of Thrones gets her way. Spoiler, she didn't. Now the sun has effects on so many things, but in this video we're going to be focusing on shadows and heat. Now the sun's positioning is going to cause shadows in your space, and it's going to cast them from both fixed structures and also from trees. And those shadows, the length of the shadows, the intensity of the shadows, that's going to change throughout the year. And this is why watching your space for that entire year is beneficial. But we can still get a pretty good idea of what's going on even on a sunny day in the fall. What do we want to know when it comes to shadows and the sun? Well, I would suggest that you hop onto Google Earth and get an overview of your plot of land. It is the easiest way instead of sketching it out, but alternatively, you can just sketch out your plot of land and begin to note where the shadow line falls as the day progresses. So when the sun first comes up in the morning, what is in sun? And as the day changes, say hour to hour or every 2 hours even, you can skip over a few and shorten this a bit, start to note where those shadow lines fall. Now, ideally, you're going to be wanting to do this on a full sun day because they are going to be casting the harshest shadows. And even now that the canopies have dropped all of their leaves, you can still see from the framework of those trees whereabouts the shadows would be falling. Now, the reason that we want to be noting how much sun each area gets is when we are picking plants later on and they fall into full sun, part sun, or they like a dappled shade, or they're an understory plant, or they like full blasting sun and heat, or they like to have their feet cool but their head in full sun like a clematis does. And we are maybe wondering, what does all that mean? Well, we need to look at how many hours each area of our yard is going to get, and if that is a morning sun or an afternoon sun. The difference between morning sun and afternoon sun comes down to temperature. In the morning, the sun is just coming up, things are just getting going, and it hasn't had chance yet to generate all of the heat that it will have in the afternoon. So that early morning sun, as much as you're getting all of the intensity of the sun's rays and all the photosynthesis and everything that that plant loves, you are not going to have the intensity of the heat. Now, afternoon sun, on the other hand, has had chance to build up the intensity of the heat throughout the day. So the air temperature, in addition to the sun's rays, is going to create a very different climatic experience for your plants that have access to this. Now, this can be detrimental to certain plants, but it can also be really beneficial. So plants like tomatoes or peppers, they're going to love this full sun, hot afternoon positioning. So by knowing how much sun each area of your yard gets and the intensity of that sun, we can better pick plants for your area. Wind is often overlooked by home gardeners, which is a shame because it has a lot of effects in your space. Some of the positive being making a space enjoyable. If you're sitting outside on a really hot day, having that cool breeze blow by is going to make or break the difference in enjoying that space. It can also help to aid in pollination of certain plants. But it can also have some negative side effects too, such as causing damage to your space, knocking plants or pots over. It can damage a number of things. It can blow in garbage, it can mound up snow, and it can also cause your plants to dehydrate much quicker than you would like, making you have to water that much more. So what are we noting when it comes to the wind? Well, watch your windows next time it rains. Odds are the wind is going to be pelting the west side of your house and leaving the east side underneath a canopy or even just the east side of your house dry. So you may have a whole area at the foundation of your house on the east side that is pretty desert-like and really doesn't get any natural rain, and you may have to focus additional watering practices in that area in order to get anything to survive. For the west side of your house, you may have to look into picking plants that will help to absorb and help to prevent that moisture being driven into your foundation. Now, the nice thing about fall is leaves are falling or have fallen at this time, and you can see the wind patterns so much easier than you would be able to see at any other time of the year. So you can start to take note as the leaves are falling off of the trees, or even as the leaves are still blowing while attached, and start to see which direction they blow. Is it doing more of a swirling pattern? Is it blowing from west to east? And little side note, our prevailing winds in Toronto are from the west and they blow towards the east. Now this starts more in the south in the summertime and swings toward the northwest in the wintertime, but I got you. Now, what you are looking for in watching for wind patterns is to determine if maybe you need to include windbreaks in your space to help to stop or slow the speed of wind, or do you have wind tunnels that could be utilized or maybe are best to be avoided, or do you actually need to open something up, maybe thin out a tree so that you get better airflow in an area to help keep it from being so buggy or moist or damp? Wind is also incredibly key to note when it comes to overwintering plants in containers. And it may not be the first thing you think of, or you may just consider it for knocking plants over. Think of the wind chill whenever we're watching for a weather forecast for ourselves and how to dress. And your pots are going to be exposed and those roots are going to be exposed. So if they're constantly being battered by a northwest wind, that plant in that pot is probably not going to be as happy as if it's sheltered into, say, an east or southeast facing area. Now, the other thing that noting your wind is incredibly beneficial for is scented plants. It would be rather unfortunate if you were to go and plant a beautiful scented plant by your front door, hoping that that scent would waft in and fragrance your home, only to find out that it's blowing into your neighbor's house instead. This problem can easily be avoided by just picking a position for that plant so that it catches the breeze and wafts itself into your house instead of wafting itself down the road. By noting where the wind is going to be strongest or where it may be weakest can help us plan for positioning of pots and also where we may be requiring additional structures to help support plants. Precipitation might be the easiest factor to note this time of year because it seems like there's always something flying out of the sky at us. Whether that be rain or snow or sleet or hail, there's something coming out of the sky. Now, in the spring months, there is a lot of water and a lot of pooling water and a lot of collecting water, but we're also not really spending a lot of time outside yet. We're still kind of hiding away in that winter hibernation mode. But in the fall, we're still kind of used to being out and about. We haven't quite gotten into hibernation mode yet, but we still get that same kind of pooling and collecting of water. The ground hasn't completely frozen up yet, but the water will still begin to collect in certain areas. And if you pop outside, you can start to note where the low spots are. Where's the water pooling? Where is the water collecting? Now, noting these low spots is going to be helpful because some plants like to have wet feet and other plants do not like standing water. And you may be able to utilize plants to help resolve certain flooding issues, but it may also indicate that you need to do some regrading before you put any plants in. You may have bigger flooding issues than you realize, or you need to do some water redirection, or maybe consider having a rain garden or gutter extensions or rain barrels. But collecting and controlling the water is going to be something that you want to take note of before you invest plants and have those crap out due to being drowned. The other thing that we can begin to take note of where the water collects and pools is that those are normally the low spots of your yard, and water is not the only thing that collects in low areas, but cold air as well. Cold air sinks, and with cold air sinking also comes frost. So if you're trying to do any maybe pushing the boundary style gardening and you're considering doing a row cover to extend a veggie garden or planting something that might be a little more delicate, you're going to want to avoid these low areas. You're going to want to pick something that's a little higher up, that's going to have a bit more access to warmth and isn't going to be impacted by the same frost and the same cooling, sinking temperatures. Now, the other thing to take note of with precipitation is going to be tree canopies. Now, why do you think we run underneath the tree when it starts to rain? Well, it's going to deflect a bunch of the water and we're not going to get as wet. But the same thing is also going to impact your plants. Now, a lot of people think that you can't plant plants underneath a pine tree because of the acidity, but it's more to do with the moisture levels that are not there, because the tree is both blocking the moisture from ever reaching the ground, and then the root system is also sucking up any moisture that may have been available. So next time it rains or it snows, you're going to want to start to take note of the drip line. And you may think that because your deciduous trees have gone and lost all of their leaves, you're not going to be able to note this. And that's not true. Even with just the skeleton of the tree, it's still going to impact where the snow falls, where the rain falls, and you'll still be able to see it. Now, I find this easiest when we get those light snowfalls where it isn't a full dumping of snow, but you just get that 1 or 2 centimeters and it's falling really nice and gently, not blowing, because it makes a perfect footprint of what that drip line is going to be. Now, once you know what the drip line is, you can begin to think about the root zone, and the root zone extends beyond that drip line. And I will have some diagrams linked in the blog post touching a little bit more on this so that you can visually see what those ratios are and how you can further figure out what your root zone to drip line is. Something else to think about is chores. Shoveling in the wintertime. Perhaps you really don't like shoveling and you would like to maybe avoid shoveling, or you are, say, planning for retirement. So you're not there yet, you're still able-bodied and you're still okay to get out and shovel, but you know that in the next few years you're really not going to want to keep doing this. Now, you can think about planning now for your garden to help offset the amount of snow that you may receive in your yard. Now, this can be done through wind and making natural blocks to help prevent snow from blowing into your space, but you can also set up, say, a line of evergreen trees over and above your driveway to help shield and deflect the snow. And this will help to lighten the load of the snow that falls on the ground underneath those trees, and therefore lighten the amount that you're going to need to shovel. Now, tree canopies do a lot more than just swallow up moisture, though. They also act as a blanket. Now, we only get frost on a cool, crisp night that has no cloud cover. And a tree is going to do the same sort of thing that a cloud cover would do. It's going to help hold in heat, retain that, and prevent frost from accumulating. A canopy tree is going to create enough of a blanket and enough of a barrier to help retain the heat from the Earth's core to insulate that area underneath, and could be enough to prevent a frost from hitting that zone. Now, during the day, on a hot summer day, tree canopies can also lower the temperature drastically, anywhere from 3 degrees Celsius to 13 degrees Celsius. How do we note this at this time of year? Even though we don't have leaves on the trees, you can still see the effects, like I had mentioned before, on a light snow, but you can also take note of it on a light frost day. You can begin to see exactly where that frost line is going to hit, or that snow line is going to hit around that drip line, and begin to take into account the temperature difference that is occurring underneath that tree's canopy. Now, we want to take note of these tree canopies and their reaches, because this is going to affect everything from wind, precipitation, sun, moisture levels, frost, you name it, it's going to be affecting it. So take note of those tree canopies and those drip lines. With trees, the other thing to note is also their seasonal effects. A deciduous tree is going to be dropping their leaves and opening up a space that may not normally receive any sunlight into getting a lot of sunlight throughout the winter months, where a conifer tree is going to be the exact same year round. So we want to take note of how it switches from season to season, and the best way to see this is also in the fall as those plants are transitioning. Fixed structures are going to be a house, a garage, a pergola, a deck. They're anything that in theory is not going to be moving or changing and is a constructed element, not a natural element. Each of these fixed structures is going to impact the space around them. For instance, a pool may bounce light around. A window may also do the same. A fence will block wind, a building will cast shadows, possibly even 2 buildings close together are going to create wind tunnels. Generally, these are items that are not going to be changed, but we still have to work with them. Now, for all of these structures, we want to note items such as drip lines and positioning for shadows. So we're once again noting the same things we notice with the tree canopies when it comes to moisture and wind effects and shadows. Now, along with fixed structures, they are often made up of varying materials. This can be anything from brick to wood, another type of stone, or maybe even a metal. And all of these materials are going to retain and reflect heat differently. They may absorb or deflect moisture, and we want to take note of what all of these are. Understanding your materials can be a powerful tool in extending your growing season. For instance, in my space, I utilize a south to west facing garage wall because it helps to reflect the heat back onto my grow bags, which are also a black material, which helps to absorb heat. All of these allow me to get a jump start on things in the spring. So where other people are still waiting for their ground to thaw and become ready for planting, I've already got seeds into my soil because it has already thawed and already drained. Now, making use of the weather this time of year to observe how your materials affect different areas is pretty simple. Once again, utilizing that moisture on either a light rain or a light snow, you can start to take note of where that snow melts first, where that rain dries up first. It's almost always going to be a full sun, hardscaped area. Your lawn or other plant material areas are going to be drying up later on. Understanding how those materials are, you can kind of hack your way into extending your season or preventing an item from being scalded or burned. If you have metal siding on your property or your neighbor's property, it's going to end up deflecting a lot of heat onto your plant material and potentially scalding. An asphalt driveway could do the same to, say, a Japanese maple canopy, and you may need to do something to deflect that direct reflection of heat. It's also going to impact your moisture levels. So the pathway in my front garden will always melt first before anything else, and so that water is going to begin to run off. Same thing with your driveway. So if you have a lot of hardscaping in your area, it may make water melt. Well, it may make the snow melt into water faster and cause more runoff, which means that you may need to do other things to help mitigate that water control. And against my porch railing, I have a canopy that comes over the porch, and it deflects a lot of water when it rains. And I used to have pots in this area, just like ceramic pots, plastic pots, and the amount of water that would come off was too much for those pots to handle, even though they had drainage holes, and they would overflow regularly. So I instead opted to put my grow bags there, and grow bags can't overflow with water because the water can leach out every which way, and although they will, say, dehydrate perhaps a bit faster because of that along the perimeter of the grow bag, they can also really help prevent overwatering. So if you are utilizing an area that tends to have heavy influxes of moisture all at once, then perhaps using traditional containers is not going to be the best bet for you, and you need to seek out different material choices in your structural elements that you are adding into your space. Now, this could also be through something like permeable pavers instead of using traditional asphalt. There are so many different things, but taking note of the existing materials in your yard and then considering their impact on the surrounding elements will help you be able to plan for swapping out those materials to something else or different plant materials to make up the differences. Microclimates really are the backbone of a garden design and plan, and we routinely use the microclimate information that I have garnered for my space in many of our projects, which you can see here. But we're going to be putting out a lot of videos covering design basics and how you can plan a garden here in Southern Ontario to really maximize our growing season for both perennials and for vegetables in the coming months. So make sure to hit that subscribe button if you are in Southern Ontario, and we will see you in coming videos.